I'm Michael Uyghur, Chief Executive of the Board of Deputies of British Jews. It's a great pleasure to welcome you all to this webinar on behalf of the Board of Deputies of British Jews and Eco Synagogue. We're really honoured to be hosting Israel's Environmental Protection Minister, Tamar Zandberg, this afternoon, for what I understand is her first engagement with the UK Jewish community since becoming a minister. Welcome, Mr. Zandberg, and thank you so much for your time with us today. For those who don't know us, the Board of Deputies of British Jews has been the voice of the British Jewish community since 1760. We are the first port of call for the government, the media, and others seeking to understand Jewish community interests and concerns. This afternoon's event touches on two key priorities for us. First, the Board of Deputies support Israel, and we express British Jewry's special bond with Israel. By holding conversations like this one with the Minister today, we can deepen and broaden the relationship, which means so much to our community. A second communal priority that this event ties into is, of course, climate change. As we approach the start of the COP-26 climate conference, it feels like the world is finally, maybe, waking up to the urgent reality of a climate emergency. We hope this afternoon contributes to the global conversation that's being had on this vital issue. The threat of climate change, to many people, does not seem to have much immediacy, and so, sadly, it can get ignored and pushed to the bottom of our agenda. But Jewish scripture tells us we are responsible for the earth, and therefore we are responsible for ensuring that its health is maintained. More than that, we should nurture it. According to the consensus of climate science, we aren't currently doing a very good job of that. The Jewish community is made up of individuals, families, institutions, and leaders. All of these must play our part if we're going to effectively tackle the threat posed by human-made climate change and other forms of environmental degradation. That's why our partner project, Eco Synagogue, is so commendable and so necessary. Eco Synagogue pulls together so many of the attributes of what a successful, self-confident, and morally rooted faith community looks like. It's a unique initiative which spans the whole Jewish community, with rabbinic leadership from 4 denominations of Judaism. It encourages and relishes working with other faiths, and showing leadership on critical issues of social justice, just as Eco Synagogue does by tackling climate change. With that in mind, I'd like to hand over to one of the 4 esteemed rabbis who lead Eco Synagogue, Rabbi David Mason, who will lead this afternoon's discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you for that great introduction. This is really, really exciting. I think I echo totally what you said, the importance here of Medinat Israel for us here in Britain as a Jewish community here, and also the importance of the environment and the growing passion here. And that matches with, of course, Minister Zandberg, your passion. We've been following really a lot what you are doing and how you are developing the campaign to protect the environment from your base, of course, in Medinat Israel. So as we have to do here in England, but I'm going to introduce you for the rest of the time now. Of course, that's my English joke there. But it's really great to have you, the Minister for the Protection of the Environment, the Sarat Haganat HaSviva. Really great that you're with us. So just for everyone here, Tamar Zandberg, as I've just said, is a minister in the government, representing, of course, the Meretz political party in Israel in the Knesset, or actually not in the Knesset, through the Norwegian law. I think it was Gabi Lasky who benefited from your place in the cabinet. But Tamar sat also for many years on the Tel Aviv Council, and so a long, in a sense, career in politics, both locally and nationally. So that was about 2013 elected to the Council of Tel Aviv, and then 2008 and 2013 into the Knesset, and now, of course, as a minister. I think we would add that Tamar was also involved in the social protest movement in 2011, advising also from an academic perspective, also on issues of social justice, transportation and housing. Tamar is studying now for a doctorate, if I'm correct, and has a master's and a degree in law. So I'm really, really excited to be with you, Tamar, and that we can bring you in a way to England. It's not mamash, it's a lot mamash, but I hope you get the feeling of being with us here in England. And of course, there'll be many of us with a large delegation from Israel. We've read 120, one of the largest delegations in Glasgow, in my home country. I was born actually in Edinburgh in Scotland. And so hopefully the weather will be good for us then. So if I could begin by asking you, Tamar, what drove you? Where do you get your passion for environmental issues from? It's a big, big area to deal with now, especially in Israel. Where did that come from, your passion for that?
So indeed, I think maybe we should ask all those who don't have the passion to deal with it, how come and where do they drive their, even I would say, ability not to do so, as it is, the greatest challenge of our generation. And now we already know what scientists tell us and what the IPCC report showed and what scientists say, that and we also already experienced the fact that it's not a matter for our children and grandchildren, but it is happening now and here. And I think that I kind of, this has always been part of my activism, of my politics, during my 8 years of being a Knesset member, and even before that as an activist, a city council member in Tel Aviv. But I think the importance and the urgency of climate is sharpening nowadays. And I think every week and every month that passes, it is even more urgent and even more important. And in that respect, I'm proud and excited to be in the chair when I can influence so much about the Israeli mitigation and adaptation to climate change.
No, it's interesting because you obviously spent a lot of time as an activist and involved in activism, and you've gone on a journey from activism into politics. Was that easy? How's that journey been of going, from being out there, being able to demonstrate and being obviously, yotel koach, right? Being stronger in voice to now in the world of politics. How's that been and how's that journey been?
Yes, so as a matter of fact, I also as a Knesset member during my 8 years and even now as a minister, I actually see myself as the fact that these positions are part of me being an activist. Some activists go and protest, and I will do that as well, also as a prime minister, as a minister, and I will participate in the climate march on Friday in 2 days in Israel, and organized by the Strike for Better Future. It's a world youth movement. And some activists have the privilege to protest. Some have the privilege just to, sign a petition, and some have the privilege to serve in an elected position. And I see myself as a messenger, and for a close period of time in the Knesset and now in the government to do everything I can, everything in my power for the benefit of the change and of activism. And then maybe someone will replace me and I will go back to being just an activist. But I think these two areas of activism and of governmental position are not as distant as one could think for me.
I think that's really fascinating. And I remember actually, living for a number of years in Israel, the ability for Chavei Knesset from Meretz to have that, to create that possibility. Zava Galon, I remember in their time, and that really the concept of an activist parliamentary member, that's really, really fascinating. But and there are challenges, I suppose, right, from the activist core. We have here, we're trying to get people to be more passionate about the climate and think about what we do. But there's also criticism of the activist base, organizations like Extinction Rebellion. We have here something called Insulate Britain, where people were gluing themselves to roads and stopping traffic. It's big stuff. and many people see an importance. Is that a challenge? How do you, keep the relationship with that core but still be, of course, the member of Knesset?
Yeah, it is true, of course, and of course there are different levels of activism, and some of them are very radical. And by the way, I always appreciate and even admire some of the activists for their devotion and their loyalty to the very, clear and pure, even I would say, values. Of course, being in power in a governmental position means also responsibility and authority. And I just before you, I ended a space conversation on Twitter with some activists, and there was a young girl, a 17-year-old from the Strive for Future, the Israeli movement. They called Noar Leman Aklim, Youth for Climate. And I told her, keep your activism and also keep criticizing us, including me personally. And I embrace that. I still see myself as an activist who does everything she can from every position that we can. Sometimes the youth have more power because they can be more loyal to the values. And sometimes we in the government have more power because we can actually move things around, even if they're not perfect. And, everybody has their own piece in the puzzle, which is great.
Fascinating. Could you just tell us a bit about the activism and the state of it in Israel leading up to COP? Who is doing the activism? I think you mentioned organizations already, but it'd be good to hear for, those in the audience here in England, and Britain. What is the state of activism in Israel?
Yeah, so on climate, we have a very vibrant civil society, some of which will join the national delegation to Glasgow. And actually, we are working today on organizing a discussion that I will talk to them, to the activists, that will take place in the conference, to update them on the different discussions and on the hearings that we will have on the governmental level. I think the environmental movement in Israel is great. We work in great cooperation with them. They work with us if we want to start new legislation, for example. They have been our partners in writing and designing the climate law that we are presenting. We did not pass it yet in the Knesset, but we are publishing it, and we are starting to work on it with other ministries, and the civil society, the environmental movement is very active and in great cooperation with us. We have a quarter every 4 times a year, professional discussions with all the environmental movement, with the professionals and with me in the ministry. And we are working together in great cooperation with civil society and the government, at least in the Ministry of Environment.
Listen, it's great, it's great to share and see your excitement and the way you relish and enjoy the position. And it's something I think really positive about this government, the government at the moment, that, crazy as it is for many of us to have such a spectrum politically, at the same time, it's functioning. There's a sense of moving forward. I think that's really great. So maybe turning also to stuff going on in Israel, and maybe starting, I know I've seen actually a question about it as well. One of the things obviously that has hit the news, especially for a very interesting piece of art as well, was of course the protest in the Dead Sea, which is quite fascinating from the artistic perspective, obviously, but obviously it's quite stark, quite something that, the receding of the Dead Sea, the growing sinkholes that are there, which is a massive symbol for people that come to Israel. For us as the people of the Dead Sea, even from our history. What would you say about that? How does that fit into your position, and what we're doing about that in Israel?
Yeah, actually, I do believe it was more of an artistic kind of setting, rather than a protest that was aimed at something, at a specific policy.
Right.
It was of a known artist that took a picture, a photo, and it was kind of an art, piece. And I do think it has to do with the environment in the sense that, preserving the environment, including our natural resources, our open spaces, our nature conservation, is an undetached part of fighting climate change. It's not just mitigating the greenhouse gas emissions. It's also about adapting better to the changing climate and helping nature and the ecosystems and the natural services that the nature provides us, helping it to help us sustain ourselves, to even survive, I would say. So I think in that respect, it is very unique to have pieces of art like that in the beautiful places of nature and climate in Israel.
It's probably the BBC described it as protest, and we know they don't always get things right. So, so I take the,
okay.
I
So
take
stand
the,
them correct.
yeah. But I suppose moving to, I suppose, a bigger question is, obviously not being able to escape the fact that this is a massive COP. COP-26 is, I mean, every year I suppose is big, but generally now there's a sense of momentum. There's a sense of, if we don't get it right now, is it too late to keep the temperature to 1.5 by 2050, etc. So it'd be really good to hear from you about going in from the perspective of Israel, and how is COP affecting setting targets. We're seeing stuff about, well, it will be 85% reduction by 2050. How much more ambitious can you impact on Israel being leading up to COP? And tell us something about your plans.
Yes, so you are right that I think the world is united around the notion that COP26 is maybe the last chance to actually make a difference, as we have a very narrow window of opportunity to actually affect and mitigate emissions so that we don't cross the 1.5 degrees that crossing it might be devastating at least in the beginning in some places of the world, and maybe for the entire globe in the future. And net zero, the idea of committing to 100% net reduction by 2050 is the core means that all countries in the world coming to Glasgow are aspiring to. You are correct that Israel, our target now that we approved in July, is 85% by 2050. We are pushing to push that up to 100% and get in one line with the net zero world commitment. We believe that Israel, being the industrialized and developed country that it is, can and should push it up. We hope we can persuade our Prime Minister before, during, or shortly after Glasgow, and we hope that Prime Minister Bennett, that is already committed, I must say, more than in the past, to understanding and acting to both mitigate and adapt and actually deal better with the climate crisis, will also take that step. And I know he's very, and in Israel, unlike many other countries, climate is not politicized. It's not like, left support or understand and the right like neglect or ignore. This is not the issue in Israel. And the fact that I come from Meretz and Naftali Bennett comes from Yamina, maybe the most far parties politically in this government, but we are united around understanding what climate does to us and what we should do to cope with it. And I hope we can get in one line with the countries of net zero very soon.
I think that gives us a lot of hope, because we're used to that stark difference. And I think in the last government certainly, there was a sense of massive differences and the aggression. And it's I think certainly I know myself, I'm sure everyone, I feel a lot of hope that there's that sense of unity over such an important thing. And I know you put a bill down, didn't you, that you want to go through Knesset on climate. on decarbonisation, etc. Could you share one or two sort of pointers from that as to how do you envisage through that your ideal as to where things would go in Israel and what the Knesset should support? It'd be good to hear.
Yeah, so I have talked about the net zero, and I think that the climate law is also a commitment. It is in the guidelines of the government when we formed it. It's actually something that Meretz put there, and we are committed to it, to have a statutory framework of commitments that will also see legislation in the Knesset. And we are hoping to put there our targets, and hopefully they will be more ambitious. And we are also trying to get their commitments for different plans of adaptation and mitigation that all ministries of the government will commit themselves to, and we also budget being put there. And I think it's something that is feasible, and the government will do it. It's no secret that I tried to do it even before Glasgow, so we can come there and declare that we already started to propose this law in the Knesset, but we haven't been able to do it before. But I'm sure that once we come back and we will absorb the atmosphere of the world's commitment and how the entire world is united around getting there, it will push us and it will motivate us to do even more once we come back.
And we're with you. And I think, in some ways, there's lots of discussion, isn't there, around the importance of the relationship between the diaspora community and Israel. And this is an issue where, there's a sense that we are really strongly with you and behind you and supporting that, because it's really massive, massive importance. Now, obviously, Israel, there are challenges in Israel. It has a, relatively high birth rate, so population growth is usually an issue. So it's not simple to think about going to zero. But one thing that obviously we do think about with Medina Israel is technology. And is there a sense in which Israel can offer that and support countries multilaterally, internationally, and also, well, maybe first think about multilaterally, but then secondly, those around it, and the new peace treaties that exist, like with the United Arab Emirates? Does that offer vectors where we can work and collaborate for the betterment of the climate?
Yes, definitely. I think it's an excellent question. And this is something that Israel, and there is a debate around being a small country and how much do we affect the global commitments on reduction of emissions. And we always say that we do have responsibility, being a part of I think the fourth largest emitter are the group of the small countries, that each and every one of them has its own contribution, and Israel is part of that. But nevertheless, there is something that Israel can contribute much way out of its size, and that is through innovation and climate technology. And Israel is a startup nation, and we are known for the ecosystem that is very supportive of startups and technology developments, especially on climate, that we already are world leaders in alternative protein, in agriculture and water technologies. And we're in a very good position to also be world leaders on energy storage and other issues of in climate innovation. And that is something that Israel can spread and contribute in a way that totally exceeds our size and our size of the economy. So we are investing in that, and actually Prime Minister Bennett stresses that, and he has background in technology and in high tech, and he always pushes us to put more focus on that, and we do so. And in our Israel delegation, we will also have entrepreneurs from the startup industry that will present and seek for investors, and we also have governmental money invested in that, and that is very important. And another issue that you mentioned, and rightly in that respect, is our regional cooperation. When we talk about climate, we look at Europe, we look at the United States, maybe China, maybe India. But here in the Middle East, We share the climate, the weather. We share the desert. We share the dryness and the heat. And that puts us in a place where we have mutual interests, both in climate and developing renewable energy and conserving the biodiversity of the desert, etc. But also that will help us maintain our national security and our geopolitics in a more stable way when it comes to Jordan, Egypt, the Emirates, the Abraham Accord. We have much to gain, and this is truly about making the crisis an opportunity in developing economic cooperations, technology cooperations here in the region, and ones that can also spread worldwide.
Yeah, it's almost that you're saying that the climate protection is almost part of conflict resolution. Can aid resolution of conflict, which is a really amazing way. In fact, I read a book by Dan Rabinovitz, The Power of Deserts, which is what I really recommend. It's brilliant at looking at the relationship with the area, with of course around Israel. Something I did enjoy was seeing you enjoy tasting some cell-based meat or plant-based meat. I can't remember. You had said it was the first time you'd Ki'ilu, as they say, as if tasted chicken for many years. So
I'm vegan from environmental reasons. And we had actually a reception at the President Herzog house in Jerusalem to welcome the delegation to Glasgow. And we had like those tables for, startups and especially in alternative protein. And for the first time in 7 years, I tasted chicken, which is not actually, it is chicken. I mean, it was taken, it's cultivated. It's like taken from a cell from a real hen, and it was grown in a lab. And then, it's not like it's not a substitute. It's the cell it's like the thing that was being produced from a real cell. And that's, it blows your mind what technology can bring us. I hope it would get commercial very soon, because I think it would actually revolutionize the way we produce and consume food and exploit the natural resources of the planet, which is the most important thing.
I think we know, everyone here, that Jewish people, I think certainly now here, like their meat often. And I think it's great to hear you say, I'm vegan for environmental reasons. I think that's quite inspiring, actually, and that's really, really, really helpful. So one more question connected with what I just asked, and maybe we'll go to some questions that people have been asking. There's some really interesting questions connected to obviously conflict resolution, and that's our relationship with the Palestinians. Are you able to share is that in any way helped? Are there any entrances in relationship with the Palestinian Authority on the basis of thinking around climate and protection of climate and water and issues like that?
Yes, the question is, the answer is definitely. I have actually, in the second month of my term here, renewed the meetings with my Palestinian counterparts, the environment minister. These dialogues were stopped in 2014, I believe, and we actually started them again around issues of waste, of taking care of the mutual landscape. That we always say that the environment knows no boundaries, and they don't know where the green line passes, and the streams just run, and the air goes freely, and the water and the land. So it is true that you mentioned in some point of the conversation the diverse government that is diverse politically, and of course that issue of politics and negotiating with the Palestinians is maybe the major thing that we do not agree on. Yeah. But I think that in terms of improving lives on the ground, in terms of environment, water, waste disposal, etc., is something that we can do good for both our peoples without even touching politics. So I definitely intend to do so, and next month we will meet again after the professionals from both sides have been working on solutions on the ground, and they will present that to us next month. So we will have progress on that as well.
Hopefully those relationships build a future which is more, where we can bring solution, and that's really great. So I'm going to go to the audience. I mean, I've got questions here, so I'll read them to you rather than unmuting and the chaos of unmuting people that we have with us. We actually have here Alex Sobel MP, who's the chair of the Net Zero Parliamentary Group, is involved in a lot of work on climate change. He's a global parliamentary rapporteur for the Interparliamentary Union at COP26. So he writes, I'd be interested to know what are Israel's negotiation priorities at COP26. Are there any particular areas that you want progress on, e.g. water scarcity? So how about that as a question? He actually does also ask, in Glasgow, will you be engaging with Labour, trade union and activist groups from the UK? That's his political base within the Labour Party. So one area is, what are the priorities to push from your perspective and engagement with the Labour movement here in Britain when you're here?
Yeah, so I think, like I said, I think net zero is a challenge for us, and we hope that we can, and I hope that once we hear, and like you said, this is the net zero parliamentary group, so I think that stresses the importance for Britain and actually for the world regarding what we like to get out of COP. I think we did cover, and I want to stress again, the issue of technology. Of course, water scarcity is something that Israel is known for, but also, like I said, alternative protein, energy storage, and other fields that in which Israel can actually provide the next breakthrough in solutions worldwide. So I think that would be in the center of our meetings, of our the things that we would like to show. We also have some things that we would like to learn and to absorb on certain policies that other countries, especially Britain and others, the UK, and we can learn in terms of environmental legislation, in terms of taxing policy, in terms of energy policy regarding fossil fuels and how fast can we move away from them to renewables. And there are many issues that we are very interested in.
Lovely, thank you. Thank you for that answer. Now, one question here, which I think I'll sort of phrase in a little way, but it's relating to issues of the transition and equality. We know that the transition to net zero comes with it issues of social justice and obviously possible inequality, and especially the question it asks with relationship to the Arab community and the Haredi community in Israel as well. So what are your thoughts on how to deal with that issues of going to net zero, whether it would drag down growth, and how you can ensure a sense of still that it doesn't create too much inequality?
Yeah, I think the challenge of a just transition to a low or zero carbon economy is something that many countries are dealing with. I visited the OECD conference 2 weeks ago, and I heard from many finance and foreign ministers around the world that they're contemplating on that. And I think for us, with the large inequality rate in Israel and big social gaps, this is of special interest. And having said that, I think that well, 2 points. First of all, it's our responsibility to make sure that no one is left behind. For example, we have a very big program with 550 million shekels allocated to climate and waste in the Arab minority as part of the big Arab correction that you probably heard of, a big governmental plan to equalize, maybe I would say, the Arab community that we passed on last Sunday. And part of it is being invested in environment and waste to make it more equal and more just. And also, I must say that when I look at the world economy, I think that the way to make it the green growth and entering the new world that climate change shapes for us, we don't have an option. You know, we will change. We will have to change whether we like it or not. So the question is, will we change, you know, out of choice and from a position of leadership and leave no one behind? Or we change in reaction to disasters that will come and to inequality that will deepen because we know that the climate situation hurts the ones that are less privileged first and maybe harder. So, you know, the choice is easy, actually, if you think about it.
Yeah, absolutely. So that was from Ben. Thank you, Ben. And we have a question from David here. I suppose it's hard to avoid mentioning it, and he's done that more than me, which is, of course, the report of the Praklitat Medina, right, the comptroller, and obviously reporting past failures to implement climate change and problems and challenges within that. What's your reaction to that report, which I think is coming out tomorrow or something, isn't it? Great timing, just before COP.
It's coming out tomorrow, sorry.
I don't know. Or there's some, isn't it? There was a report of the ombudsman of.
Oh yeah. It came out yesterday.
Yesterday,
yeah. So we did have a report that I must say that I was very happy that it was published, because it actually, you know, was an accelerator to everything that we say for years, and got an official, you know, stamp on it, saying that climate is actually real, that we have to act, and we have to act now, and we have to act harder and faster than what we have done up until now, which is practically not a lot. And I actually met the ombudsman on the Rabin memorial ceremony a week ago, and he told me that he's about to publish that next week, and that he hopes that that will be a tool in promoting a more strong and more quick action. And actually, the headlines that it took, and the interest that the media and the public showed in it, I think showed that things are changing also in the awareness of the Israelis, and I think that is for the better.
Yeah, it's almost like 10, 15 years ago, it was very different in terms of people's, you know, gishat, you know, their approach to this, and now it's just there, is it? Yeah, exactly. Now, Kim has asked an interesting question here, which is, obviously there's a reliance often in Israel on, understandably, because of the sources of it, on gas as a source of energy. So this is, I suppose, an energy question, which is really key as a contribution, obviously, to warming homes and to and so towards fossil fuel emissions. What's the level of energy now generated from renewables? And I suppose clearly solar is you know, in Israel and the Middle East is going to be better than here in terms of sun. But what's happening? What's the direction for that? It's better where you are.
Yeah, well, I think if you could create renewable energies from rain and clouds, maybe the UK would be a world leader.
It'd be good, yeah.
But on sun, yeah, it is more here in our region. So yeah, so unfortunately, I think it's very embarrassing to say that Israel hasn't reached the 10% renewables yet, even though 10% was our target for 2020. We are still somewhere between 7 and 8% up until now. And something, we have crossed the 50% of our electricity being produced from gas, from our natural gas or fossil gas. And actually, we are on the verge of a debate whether to explore and more findings and more reservoirs of gas that will be allocated to export rather than to the Israeli needs. And our position, our environmental position, that we should leave the new drillings of gas and stay with what we have for the next few years or decade, and develop heavily the field of renewables and especially solar, like you said, so that we can meet the targets and also, of course, reduce emissions and put our money where our mouth is. Because if we commit to targets and we want to develop renewables, but in the same time we develop new reservoirs of gas for export, the emissions are global. If we can't count them under the Israeli land, it doesn't mean they disappear. So this is our position, and we hope we can convince the entire government in that position very soon.
It's almost like you're playing catch up. I mean, that's connected back to the report. But it's good that, it's amazing that you're doing it. Andrea, who's actually our program director at Eco Synagogue and does really great work, asked a really interesting question actually here. How do we tackle climate change denial and misinformation? And it occurs across the board, probably less than before, but it still is there, and even within the Jewish community as well. What do we do about that? How do we tackle that? Any advice on that?
Yeah, so I think, this is the era of fake news and denial of COVID, of climate. And I think there is much in common between the two phenomena of the world, plague of COVID and climate. Both of them rely heavily on science and knowledge and research. And, I found it that the more knowledgeable and the more science-based field that you are at, the more you will get also the denial and the ignorance. And that's ironic, but it's just the way it is. And I think that, of course, as we all know, social networks has a lot to do with it, and populism has a lot to do with it. And I think that it is a challenge. We cannot dismiss it. I think that the true, dealing with it is a mixture of providing the knowledge in a very, very clear and open way and honest. And on the other hand, when it comes to really the extreme of the debate, and when truly lies are being distributed in the networks, etc., you just block it. You just say, you make the conversation up to a certain point. You make it very, very honest and very, very knowledge-based. But when it comes to, deliberately distributing lies that can be dangerous, even if it's with COVID or with climate, then you just have to, just detach yourself, because then you get to an endless loop with what we call trolls, and just you will end up not doing anything, just making arguments with people who are not about dialoguing or making the conversation, just hiring you with endless, loops of lies. So,
do you think that the fact that there's more real evidence of climate change, floods in Germany, it's like Germany down the road, right? For people here, fires in Australia, does that, we'd rather not have that, obviously, but does that might make it harder to be in denial? There will always be those, I suppose, that are, but will that suddenly you're waking up to the reality? No?
The thing about deniers is that the core is not interested in the truth and in reality. So it can hit you in the face and you would still deny. But those are a small minority. I think that the summer of 2021 was very clear about how the chain of climate disasters that the world has seen, starting from Germany, which is a very strong and infrastructure country that is also home for the first Green Party, and still it's not immune to North America and here in the Middle East. So I think this last summer was out of the question that you cannot deny it any longer. And also the IPCC report that proved that this is all, man hand made. This is not just a space and global phenomena, but this is something that is man-made. Is also a lesson for us.
I think the IPCC report was so clear on it, was really helped. So possibly last question, but a really good one, I think, a really fascinating, from Angeline, and Angeline is also on our team, our Eco Synagogue team. Can you name 3 effective changes that will have an immediate impact now on climate change?
In Israel?
That's a good point, because I realized the question is quite vague. Well, I mean, I suppose it's worth looking at individuals, which could be both Israel, I suppose, and here. What are the 3 changes that we need people to start making, in a sense?
Okay, so I think I would like to focus more on the government. I know it's a discussion in the environmental movement. To what extent we should demand change, like behavioral changes from citizens, versus demand policy changes from governments. I think that in Israel, we are now implementing a carbon tax, which is a huge step for us. And for the first time, it's approved mechanism for a reduction of emissions. We are, I want to mention the climate law that we haven't been able so far to implement, but we definitely need to. And I also want to mention the innovation that we have talked about it during this conversation, but I want to stress that that is something that Israel can also spread, to the world. And I know that this is a booming field of technology and innovation. I think these are the 3 steps that Israel can, 2 of them, affect ourselves, and 1 affect the world that could actually make a difference.
Maybe finish very quickly with a vision, just some nugget of a vision of how would you look at Israel in 30 years? Could you tell us something? What would be different about the Israel of 2050 in terms of how people in Israel would live?
Yeah, so I hope we will be a zero carbon economy in 2050, in 30 years. I hope we will rely heavily on public transportation rather than private, which is a pyramid that has to reverse in Israel. I hope we will be smart in planning our cities and our spatial space in ways that we can grow and in the same time like in a way dense our living, so we can keep the open spaces, we can keep the ecosystem functioning, and helping us survive in the climate that will be, and we know for sure that it will be hotter and drier in 30 years from now. And I hope that in my elderly days, of my late 70s, in 30 years, I will be able to look at my 2 daughters and know that I left healthy and clean and better a future for them.
Thank you, Minister Tamar Zandberg. That was, I must say, really very enjoyable, very inspiring, and filled me with a lot of hope. And that's really, we need that at the moment. We really do. So thank you so much. I'm going to hand over. Toda, mamash toda. And I'm going to hand over to Rabbi Tanya Sachanovich, who is going to thank you for today. So over to, Rabbi Mark. I have.
We're so sorry, Minister Zandberg, that Rabbi Sachanovich, Tanya, can't make it this afternoon, sadly. So I get the chance to step in for her and to bring a vote of thanks. Rabbi Mason asked you to do a bit of prophecy just before, to be a Nevi'ah of climate change, what it would be like in 30 years' time. And I know that an illustrious predecessor prophet, Deborah, once sat underneath a Tamar, underneath a date palm, and had to kind of tell Israel where they were going. What you spoke about was of course, prophetic in many ways, this sense that we are at the last chance for change if we're not going to be exiled from a decent life by climate change and by environmental degradation. And we thank you for reminding us of that. One of the things that many Jews, when they find themselves in Israel, find rather wonderful is at the front of every bus, it says, Mipnei Seva Takum, stand up before the aged, straight out of Torah. That's how we say, give up your seat. Maybe at some point, Israel altogether will have the words, L'Ovda U'Leshomra, look after this land as well as working it. You said to us that Israel may be small, but it punches above its weight in terms of innovation and the possibility to spread to the world great ideas to be able to help the environmental protection that you're responsible for in Israel be something which is better exercised in other countries. And many of us will know that Israel was the original pioneer of solar heating back from the 1950s, and you see it on the roofscape of anywhere in Israel that this has been the case. So we really thank you for being with us. You said to us, Israel must change out of a position of leadership and not drive change out of reaction to disaster and trouble. And under your leadership and that of your government, we really hope that that will indeed be the case. And we're with you, Jewish communities of the world. This is the Jewish community of Britain, a very strong representation that is with you today, hoping that our Israel will indeed be leading, will be giving leadership, and perhaps will enable us all to be a solar-powered light to the nations, if at all possible. So we thank you very much and hope that you will enjoy being at COP26 in Glasgow, where you will see that solar power would be a challenge, but wind and rain power will not. We wish you well and welcome you to our country and look forward to you being with us and to Israel achieving its aims at COP26 together with those.
Thank you so much. Thank you for your time and for the invitation.